In college, as we moved towards graduation, my friend Paul said he was going to hike the entire Appalachian Trail. And I said, well, I'd like to do that, but maybe just for a couple weeks. My 2 weeks on the Appalachian Trail turned into, I think it was a week at the most, all of it in pain. And although I had a Boy Scout backpack, I was not prepared. Absolutely not prepared. My friend Paul was not a great communicator, and he had been preparing a lot for backpacking, down to the level of cutting his toothbrush in half so his bag would weigh less. He had all the gear and things like this, and I hiked the Appalachian Trail with a children's thrift store bought backpack that had a Boy Scout, what they used to call them, troop number 247 on it or something like that. It was ridiculous, and I had the wrong boots, and it destroyed me. Paul's parents, he was wealthy, and it was ironic because we had all of our backpacking gear and they drove us to, I think it was Kentucky. They drove us there in a Jaguar. We got out, they drove to this trailhead, those Jaguars on the dirt road, this, that, and the other, and then it like pushes two college boys out into the wild, and the parents were just kind of like, this was before cell phones. I didn't have the map, Paul had the map, that was a mistake. We were like, hey, well, see you later. I had been exercising a lot, so I was in pretty good shape. But the first day we stopped for camp, and I had never really set up a tent or anything like this. And then we set up the tent. I'm like, well, there's still daylight. And he's like, yeah, but we need to, start earlier. You don't want to pitch the tent in the dark. He's like, bring your food over here. We got to tie up the food. And I was like, excuse me? He's like, well, there's bears. Bears here or bears eventually? And he's like, well, I just don't know. He said, I just read that there's bears and you're supposed to tie up your food. Great. It seemed to be a pretty eventless sleeping night, but it was the first time I'd slept outdoors in years and years and years and years. I had more of a problem adjusting. The Appalachian Trail is not meant to be hiked if you wear contact lenses. I wear contact lenses but have no choice but to wear contact lenses because they put pressure on my cornea for keratoconus. You get dirty hands with contact lenses, and if you lose them, I mean, seriously, I used to create this little ceremonial tray, for like doing my lenses and washing my hands, and it was a real pain in the ass. So one day rolls to the next, we're having fun. I was drinking water like crazy. We had the filters and the pumps and stuff, but he didn't seem to drink water at all. And I could like put a gallon away, and I'm like, I can't carry all this water, it's just crazy. As we started increasing in elevation, we started hitting some weather and it started raining. And before that, my feet were getting sore. I remember we went up a mountain and we came down a mountain. I should have just worn sneakers, for God's sakes, because the boots, in the back of the boot, it went like this. It was a fitted heel, like safari boots. Every time I bent my heel, I could feel it rubbing. The boots were broken in, but I didn't have them broken in with a pack. So I had a 60 or 70 pound pack, and so my foot was spreading wider in the boot, and I didn't know the obvious. So basically it got to the point where I could barely walk. It was very, very painful. I'm like, Paul, I can't go on. He found there was a place to stop in the trail, and it was this biker's camp, basically just a motorcycle camp, and they actually had a shower and stuff like this. So after hiking a few days, I was just like, I welcomed the shower and stuff like this. And I remember I had my boots off by the fire, and it was terrible. I had blisters on the back of my heel, under my heel, on the bottom of my heel. I had it under calluses. I've never had blisters like that. And Paul gave me some terrible advice because he was a gymnast, and he's like, oh, you have a blister, you're supposed to cut the skin off. So I cut all the skin off, but it was really, really thick. And now I had like a hole, and it was very painful. I remember the old man that was running the bikers camp, he saw my feet, and he's like, kid, you're wrecked. He said, don't go anymore on the trail. And I'm like, well, what if I just change the boots? And he's like, not my advice. That night, there was 5 or 6 of us. We'd met up with those other 2 guys, and he's like, yeah, this is really bad shape. And then there was another guy at the fire who had this Speed Racer t-shirt on. He was like a motorcycle jockey, but he spent all night drinking and telling us how he really had no reason to live because his girlfriend had dumped him and whatever. It was kind of tragic. He was there on his finding himself. Turns out that the only way in town to go get some shoes was on the back of this guy's motorcycle. And so the next day I'm like, is he sober enough? Is he sober enough? And I borrowed a helmet from the old man. The helmet didn't fit. It was like, I grew up on dirt bikes, so I understood. I'm like, doesn't fit. The Speed Racer guy said, well, I'll take you in town. The thing is we were on a mountain, and we'd go on that thing, and then I couldn't see because I was holding on to him. And then anytime I just leaned with him, and so I would lean like this, my helmet would go down, and I would be like, oh my God, we're on the wrong side of the yellow lines. I'm like, he's going around these hairpin turns on the mountain. I'm like, well, this is it. This is how it goes. I'm like, this is not going well. So we went into town. I was scared out of my mind the whole time because he was really driving fast, and I'm like, this is stupid fast. We went in and we had Chinese Chinese food, and then I was like, oh, this is really good. But now we found one shoe store and they didn't have a lot of boots. I bought these sneaker boots, and I bought them 2 sizes too big so I could put padding around my feet to hike in them. We went back to the camp and I got the Chinese food in the carry-out bags in between me, and then I got boots, on my shoulder, and I'm like holding on for life, and it's like zoom, zoom, zoom. And I mean, some cars just brushed by me. I was like, oh. And we got back and I'm like, I think I'm okay. I walk around in these boots, and I bought all the Band-Aids and everything like this. But we hit 2 days of rain after I had my new boots, and they were nylon and they were not waterproof. So now I'm in wet boots with wounded feet for 2 days. And I remember going up to the top of this hill and it's snowing, and I'm in these, didn't have the right clothes, and I have these long johns on and a poncho, and I'm like, oh Jesus, I'm gonna have to get naked with my friend because it feels like hypothermia, and he warned me about that. Like, I'm not getting naked with my friend over these bad boots. And he was already at the top of the hill because he was in good shape. And he's like, I'll go ahead, I'll set up for us, set up camp and just make it up. It was just like 1 foot at a time, just 1 foot at a time. And every time I stepped on it, it just felt like needles and nails. But the thing is, there's no alternative. So it was that kind of situation. Trail mix never tasted so good. I got to the top of the hill and it was really good. And then the doctor guys are like, dude, you're done. You were done back there. And they're like, let's hike into town, go to a convenience store. He was saying, get some Ambisol, which is the baby medicine for babies that are teething. That's the medicine you can take for your foot. That, for some reason, that was a suggestion. So we come in town, we eventually come onto a road, and we look like, 4 or 5 guys are pretty rough looking, young, and we're going by these real poor houses. And we're all like, deliverance. And there was a convenience mart, looked like they were just about to close, and then I bought some of the stuff and I just like dumped it all over my feet. But I could barely walk. My friends told the guy who was running the mart, is like, our friends broke down, can you give us a ride back to the trail break? And he's like, no, sorry. And anyways, his wife said, look, I'll close up. You drive these boys up there. They're harmless, whatever. We got in the car and he had his hand on the pistol the whole time. I'm like, you're afraid of us? I'm like, seriously? It was getting dark by now, and that's why we didn't want to walk. And okay, up here, to the right, to the left, and the guys are looking at the map. They're like, okay, right here. And he's like, are you kidding me? Right here? You want me to let you out? They're like, yeah, this is fine. There's a campsite right up here. It's like, it's not a good place to be let out, guys. Are you sure? And we're like, why not? He's like, I just wouldn't do it. He's like, but it's your call. So he said goodnight. We talked amongst ourselves. A couple of the guys walked ahead and they're like, I can't find the campsite. So we slept by the side of the road, which is even worse idea. We slept behind these big boulders. And the trouble is behind the boulders, the ground was like this. So I would sleep and I would keep ending up, crumpled. It was a very uncomfortable night and not a lot of traffic. But in the morning, we woke up and these 2 guys come out of this is like sunrise, and they're coming out of I want to call it the jungle, but it was whatever it was, the forest. And they're all in fatigues and camo gear, and they're hunters. And I was just like, oh my God, we would have been in bad shape. They didn't have any infrared goggles or whatnot. A sleepless night, and I'm like, I gotta go home, guys. This is where we part ways. We hitchhiked to another small town. And basically, we just rode in the back of a truck to this place that it was like Sunday, and they had like the Sunday restaurant place. It was a big barbecue going on, or whatever it was. I guess it was brunch time by the time we got there. We wanted to eat there, but they wouldn't serve us. They're like, you guys, come on, seriously, we'll bring you something outside. And I'm like, can I just use the restroom? And I had contact lenses the whole time. I'm like sleeping in my contacts. It's terrible. And the doctor guys, this is the point actually where they said, this is as far as we go. And my buddy Paul said, yeah, we're going to go back. I hitchhiked a ride into a little further in town, and there was a train station. And so I went to the train station. I looked at the schedule, but it was way, way away. I'm like, what do I got, 8 hours here? I'm like, seriously, I'm glad there's a train. So I went and got a pizza, and a liter of Pepsi came with it, and I'm walking down the street in an empty town. I'm like, does anybody live here? Just as I'm like, whoa, walk in the middle of the road. This is very like movie-like, I'm like, I think I'll have this memory. So I walk down the middle of the street, eating my pizza, holding my Pepsi, and I go to the train station. Absolutely nobody's there, because I'm like, oh, I'll buy a ticket. And I'm like, oh shit, maybe it doesn't stop here. I can't buy a ticket. I'd never ridden a train, so I didn't know you buy the tickets on the train. I have a picture that exists that I took in the mirror from there. Hopefully it will turn up. It's unshaven and stuff like that. Anyways, I got on the train and I was looking pretty rough and probably not smelling great either. The train just felt like a private jet to me at that point. It was fantastic. I took the train to Chicago. I showed up in Chicago very late, got to a bus station, and then I got on the bus, and the bus driver, I looked bad. He's like, where are you coming from, kid? And I bullshitted because I'd been to Africa. I said, I was just getting back from Africa. And he goes, looks like it. So I started telling him stories about Africa just because I wanted to be interesting. So I took the bus to the CTA train, and I took the CTA train to my apartment on the north side. And I got to my apartment, I couldn't find my keys. I'm like, I got all the way home, and now I had to sleep on my porch in my house after traveling for like 30 some hours because I didn't want to wake up my landlord, this old lady. I was more scared sleeping on my own patio at night in that neighborhood in Chicago than I was in any other part of the hike. In the morning, I rang the bell, I got in, and I called my mom, told her I was safe, because we had no cell phones. And I thought, man, in the last 24 hours, I was in a car with a guy with a pistol, in the back of a pickup truck, sitting on the side of it. Then I have a bus, train, a CTA, a motorcycle. I'm like, it was more about the trip getting home than actually hiking on the Appalachian Trail. And it turns out my buddy Paul stayed on the trail for a year, and he got up to a certain point and stopped for the winter, and then he worked on a fishing boat. And when I last talked to him, I'm like, how was the fishing boat? He's like, I got in a knife fight. I'm like, oh man, I was hiking with the wrong guy. He was like a suburban kid. So, and I'm like, oh, I'm glad I didn't make it to the fishing boat with you. But that was my after graduation vacation. Maybe this is why I don't like vacations. They're too much damn work. The lesson is be prepared. And although I had a Boy Scout backpack, I was not prepared. Absolutely not prepared. I relied entirely on my friend's understanding of the trail. He had the maps, he knew what was coming. I just thought I was going for a hike. That was the mistake.